What I want to know is how does one get involved in doing rock work as a woman? Do you really, really want to know? Or do you just want the rehearsed response that I always give? What would happen if we chose to really tell the truth about ourselves? Like if we really, really just told the real truth of our lives? I'm not saying that it's true. I'm saying that it's my truth.
You're listening to Hammered.
On the drive back from Tampa, Greg and I end up having to stop in Valdosta, Georgia to get some rest. Of course, I'd started drinking about an hour into the trip because I was so nervous and scared and guilt-ridden for leaving like that. So there we are in this cheap motel eating convenience store food, Cheetos and crackers and whatever, drinking beer. And then Greg professes his love to me. Of course, I acted silly and sort of blew it off, and we just, I kept laughing. Oh, that's crazy. And so I knew that was not going to be a good thing. And I loved him. I loved him as a friend, and he was real silly, and I trusted him. But I thought, oh, Lord, honey, we can't go down this road. So I kept bringing up my mother, I was actually going to go to her house. He was going to take me to her house because I had called her crying and kind of told her that Dave was there. And I didn't tell her that he had proposed, but she knew that I needed to leave and said I could come back and stay with her until I got on my feet for $200 a month to stay in my teenage bedroom. And I was riding a motorcycle at that time, so I had to get a job that was close by. So I went down to this local Amoco station convenience store, and there was a manager guy in there, and he was a really cute gay guy named Jonathan. He sort of looked like a cross of Tom Selleck from Magnum P.I., with a well-manicured horseshoe mustache and a perfectly shaped stubble beard, kind of like he'd used a stencil. And he had like this hairstyle that was kind of like Rob Lowe at that time. Not quite a mullet, but it was sort of headed that direction. But he wore this navy blue satin New York Yankees baseball jacket, and he had a scarf that was sort of tucked around his neck and down in the jacket, sort of like a somebody from Europe or something, and he had these really blue eyes and these long eyelashes, and he was just really adorable. And he hired me on the spot. He said, he was real sarcastic and real funny and quick, and he said, you've got a warm body and half a brain, you're hired. And, of course, that was very complimenting. But, he trained me, and I noticed all the regular customers, these girls would kind of flirt with him, and he could turn it on and flirt back. And so he had a little following coming into the convenience store, and it was always cold in there. It was winter. And so he was always wearing that jacket. But my hours were going to be 3 to 11:45, and beer was sold until 11:45. So, it'd take me about 15 minutes to close up. And he said I could have one beer at closing. So that was going to be like my reward for standing there all day. And this was disturbing to me because I think, the pay rate was ridiculously low, and I had gotten used to making a lot of money, so I didn't know how this was going to work itself out. And cigarettes were $1 a pack. So I started figuring out, like, if somebody came in and said, give me a pack of Marlboros, and if they had correct change, like $1, then I would make a little tally mark on a sheet of paper, and then I would hit the no sale, and the register would open. These are old-fashioned registers, and I could put the dollar in the register. But I would keep this tally going underneath on a shelf. I'd had this little pad of paper, and at the end of the night, I could tally how many of these little marks I had. You know, the little 4 with a slash through it was 5, and I would count that out, and that could be like my spending money. You know, I had so much justification. You know, I could justify anything. It was like, well, you know, I'm more educated, or I'm smarter than to have to work here, and you know, I'll help you build this business, so I should get like a little bit more. You know, I could always figure out some way, and I felt like I was becoming some sort of like con artist, you know, and I could barely pay my mother the $200 rent. So Greg, you know, he starts calling me every day, and he's still the freezer manager at the ice cream shop. So he's sort of telling me what's happening over there, you know, and nobody knew that I was in town. Nobody knew what had happened to me. And he said that they were worried and upset, and that I had just vanished, and he would just pretend like he didn't know where I was. But it was, you know, it was winter, and nobody was really driving. There were a few diehards, but most people lived off their bonus checks in the winter. And so Greg started inviting me to his house after work, which was at midnight. And, you know, but I had this nightlife. I was so used to, you know, having a nightlife of some sort. And now I'm living at my mother's. And, you know, my mom would go to bed by 10 o'clock. And so I would like go over to Greg's house, and he lived with these weird roommates in this ranch house, you know, in like a regular neighborhood, like a regular suburban neighborhood. And back then there weren't a lot of like rented houses in neighborhoods like that. That was sort of a new thing starting to happen. But his roommate, one of the guys' name was Chris. He had long hair, parted in the middle and real straight. And then his face was real long, kind of like his hair. And he kind of looked like Todd Rundgren, who I really liked as a singer. But they had this real dark, smoky den, and they would all be stoned, and they'd play Dungeons and Dragons. And they play some pretty good music, you know, which I was into that. But I remember them playing Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery. Well, this one particular night, I stayed over there way too late, and I got home at 4:30 in the morning. Well, the next day, my mother had left me a note before she went to work. And basically it said, get out. I'm not going to pace these floors worried about you. I've already lived that life, and I don't want to be thinking about you being dead in some ditch. Well, of course, this just set me off. I just went into a panic, you know, because everything by this time is all about me. It's all about me. What am I going to do? So what do? Of course, I call my daddy. And they're divorced, and, you know, he's living in the Amber Apartments over in Norcross. So he's just gloating, you know, and he says, I knew she wouldn't want you over there. You just come back and pack up and come back over here. So, of course, that's what I did. And I left Jonathan a note at the convenience store and never went back, you know. And now what am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do? So I get up my nerve, and I kind of start talking to Greg, and I ask if he thought Stuart would let me come back. And Greg, of course, is just excited and happy and goes to Stuart, and they were pretty close, you know. So because Greg had been there a pretty long time as the freezer manager, and he was stable. Greg was a stable guy. So he goes back and asks, and now Dan, the smart, short, chubby, sweet guy that always wore navy, he wore like a navy Izod and navy pants and brown kind of leather tie-up shoes that looked really worn down. And he had kind of reddish hair, and he was real round. His face was round. His body was round. His fingers were kind of fat. And he was very kind. He was really sweet, and he had a big vocabulary. He seemed like a really smart guy. And so he had stepped into Bill's old job, which was the fleet manager. And as a fleet manager, you get a cut of each driver. So there could be some pretty good money there if you have, good drivers. But Dan lived at the Claremont Motor Hotel, which was on Ponce de Leon. Well, that's what we call it as Atlanta natives. You call it Ponce de Leon, but I think it's really Ponce de Leon. But underneath this kind of apartment building was the Claremont Lounge. And it was kind of located in the basement, and it was a strip club. And the lodge had like gaudy, weird art. And then the lounge had these like really unusual strippers and dancers, probably trans, and just, it was kind of an interesting place. But it was kind of late February and the routes were starting back up. And so when Greg asked Stuart says, yes, 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 tell her to come back. They needed my sales ability. So I come back, very quietly with my tail tucked. I was humiliated. I felt like a loser, and Chris was happy to see me, of course. She didn't get real happy about too much, but I could tell that when I came through the door, she smiled and kind of, gave me that look. And it was really like a dysfunctional family. It was like, when you do bad in a dysfunctional family, then everybody sweeps it under the rug, and now you just start all over. Clean slate. My old route had been taken. So, Dan and Stuart decided to put me in as an alternate driver, which meant that I would have to drive each route for every driver to have a day off here and there, which meant that I would be in a different van every day and go to different people every day. And Stuart wanted me to study each route for improvement, to see how drivers could improve. So I'm, it's like they're kind of giving me a new challenge, I guess you could say. And so, I was lo and behold back about 2 weeks, and I get in one night, and guess who is behind the window counting money? Oh my God, I was elated. It was Bill. He'd come back from Tampa after calling Stuart and telling him that Tampa wasn't for him. I was so happy to see him. He grinned and we laughed and we screamed. And so now Bill was going to be the branch manager, Sleazy Don's old job. And Dan is now the fleet manager. Greg is still the freezer manager. And I am the alternate driver, which is Dan's old job. Of course, I'm the only one that didn't get a pay raise or a promotion. Mine was more of like a lateral move. But I used to get kind of sick to my stomach when we would have these little meetings, and they would talk about when the projects and the government housing get their welfare checks at the first of the month, and how we have to hit these places real hard that first week. And I hadn't been in many of these places on my old route. I had quite a bit of poverty, but I hadn't seen anything yet. I began driving these different ice cream vans, and they were nasty. They smelled like sour milk, and they were full of trash. And these guys would drive these vans and never clean them and throw like ice cream packaging all over the floor. And any of the ice creams that were dairy based would be like grossly sour, I'd have to like get a hose and hose the thing out before I could even go out on the route. It would make me sick. So I was doing kind of double work, And then I'd look in their freaking freezer and they didn't even have any inventory. And I was shocked at how were they even making any money? I'd been spoiled on my old route. And when I did return to my old route as an alternate driver, the people were shocked to see me. And they were a bit reserved. I mean, they were happy to see me, but I had abandoned them. So there was a cautiousness to not be too happy. I was ashamed and I was hurt, and I tried to explain that, whirlwind experience had happened and I had to go, but they weren't buying it. I don't blame them. Many of these people were living in dysfunction and alcoholism and violence. And I had been a constant in their lives for a year and a half, but the trust had been broken. If I just told them what was happening and kind of planned to exit and be upfront and tell them the truth, I was really sorry, and I'd been so self-absorbed and self-centered out of, just out of sight, out of mind. But it doesn't work. Out of sight, out of mind doesn't work if you have to return. That's a hard one. One day, I had to drive down to Athens, Georgia. And it was a long drive back, and some of these routes were far, they were like rural areas and little towns and little pockets. But within these little areas, there were usually government housing buildings and, where old people live, poor people live, just different classes. But once again, it was like this search for the dollar, and but this one night I pulled into the shop and there were two girls standing at the window talking to Bill, and they were apparently turning in their money, and he was laughing and carrying on with them. And I came through the door and he yells, "Jill! That's the girl I was telling y'all about. Jill, this is Allison and Lisa. They're new." He said, Allison is going to take your old route and Lisa's going to take Regina's old route. Now, Regina had Buford Highway and Chambly, all the car dealerships and this industrial back streets. I mean, Regina had a gold mine, but she'd built it. She had established this money-making district with her looks and her alluring personality. And I'm thinking, well, why is Bill giving these two such good routes? And, my route, I had built that route into such a really good money-making route. But, a route is only as good as you make it to a demographic degree. So I wasn't that concerned about not being able to build some of these routes. But I was a little bit curious about these two. And, now I had sort of this reputation, like I had been the top salesperson, and I'd sort of played that out. And then I had gone, to Tampa to open the new branch, and then I disappeared, but now I'm back. And so I sort of had this, a little bit a larger than life, but not really reputation. And it's amazing how the mind can trick you into thinking certain things about yourself. It's not really the mind, it's more like the ego. And at one point, Kurt, the Mormon, had even come and taken over the cage, taken over the window before Bill had returned, because he kind of wanted to see what was going on in Atlanta, because Atlanta was moving ahead. And so he came all the way from Salt Lake City to hang out and to kind of get a feeling of why this city was doing so well. And Stuart and him were kind of buddy-buddy. But Kurt the Mormon was a real straight-laced, blonde, blue-eyed, kind of smug, kind of a snob. He was like an ice cream snob. But I'm standing there, and so Bill introduces Allison, and she turns around, and she's barefoot with blue jeans, like covering her feet, but you could see her feet sticking out, and she had long hair and bangs that hung down over her eyes, and she sort of, shook her head back, and she's kind of cocky, and she was short and just sort of, I guess if a guy has short man syndrome, well, she would have had short woman syndrome. Not that women have that, but it kind of reminded me of that. So she says, "How's it going?" And, she kind of looked like Janis Joplin, but she didn't have much color in her face. Like, she sort of looked gray to me. Like her complexion was sort of off. Like, was there any blood in her? She just had this really pasty pale, and it wasn't even like, ivory complexion. It was just kind of gray. I don't even know any other way to describe it. But she was my age, about 21, and then the other girl turned, and her name was Lisa, and Bill introduced her, and she looked like a young, disheveled Michelle Pfeiffer. Energetically, when she looked at me, I kind of felt a hit, and I thought, oh no, what in the world? This is the last thing I need.
Hammered is recorded and produced in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. It's narrated by Jill Haynie, produced by Maggie Briggs and Jill Haynie, and with sound design, editing, and music by Alexander Rodriguez. Our beautiful artwork was created by Lauren Caddick, and we'd like to send a special thanks out there to Minnie and Robin. You can check out our website, podcasthammered.com, and follow us on social media for updates.